Hey everybody, today I wanted to do a real-time walkthrough of a stitch sampler, and I have it for free, and I will leave the link below to where you can download the PDF document to print it off. I got a comment recently on my Embroidery 101 video, and I'll link that below. It's just got some tips and tricks on how to learn embroidery, and I had asked people to kind of share their tips as well. And LR brought up a really good point, saying that stitch samplers are a really good way to learn because you learn a variety of stitches and it can look really cool, but it can also really help you get the basics down without feeling like you're going to mess up a project. And I think that was a really good comment, and it's definitely very helpful. So I decided to make just a basic stitch sampler for you guys, and then I will be walking through each of the stitches and we'll complete it together. So you'll need just a couple things to complete the stitch sampler. All you'll need is a 5-inch hoop. I have the pattern here printed off, and it prints off to fit a 5-inch hoop. You'll need some kind of pencil or water-soluble marker to transfer the design over. You'll need an embroidery needle. You'll need a pair of scissors. It doesn't have to be embroidery scissors. It can be like any sort of pair of scissors you have around the house. It doesn't really matter. And you'll need some kind of fabric. I recommend something that's like a cotton canvas. This is muslin. Muslin's really good too, and it's really cheap to get, so you don't have to worry about wasting fabric. Then you'll need some colors of your choice. You can use one for this entire project, it doesn't really matter, but I picked out a couple of different ones so they kind of contrast each other so that you can kind of see the different stitches while we're going. And I think that's about it. So I went ahead and put my fabric in the hoop. You want to make sure that the screw is tight on the top and that your fabric is pulled tight, but it's not basically obscuring the grain of the fabric. As you can see, it doesn't look like it's doing that, and it's not loose at all. And once you've printed out your stitch sampler, what you can do is basically put your hoop face down on the fabric, and then you can trace the design onto the fabric. Muslin's nice too because it's kind of thin, so I don't have to use a light box to see through. You can use a light box, an iPad, or a sunny window if you need some extra lighting if the fabric's a little bit more opaque. So I'm just going to go ahead and transfer over the pattern. Now I'm just going to flip the fabric back to the right side of the hoop so that we don't have to worry about the ridge of the hoop getting in the way. And I'm going to keep this as a key so that I can keep track of which stitches we're doing for what piece of the sampler. And I'll meet you back here in just a second. I'm going to put my embroidery hoop in the embroidery stand. So the first stitch that I wanted to go over for this project would be, I would consider the most basic stitch, which is a back stitch, and we'll be doing the stem of this little sprig right here in a back stitch. So to make it easier on yourself, I would tie a knot in the bottom of the thread. That way you don't have to worry about pulling the entire piece of floss through. So you're gonna start at the very bottom of this stem, and you're gonna come up through the fabric. Then you're going to skip a little bit of space and then go back down into the fabric. And then you'll skip some space again and go up through the fabric. And this time you're going to be going back down where that first stitch ended. And you can continue doing that. So you'll skip a little bit of space and then go back down where the previous stitch ended. And that is how you do a back stitch. I think the major thing to focus on here is to try and make your stitches as even as possible, and make sure that when you're butting up against the previous stitch that it's sitting flush with that stitch, because it'll look kind of jagged if you don't do that. But this one is a relatively simple stitch to learn. So the next stitch we'll be doing is the fly stitch, which are these sprigs on the stem right here. So you're going to be coming up through your fabric on the tip of either one of the little sprigs that we have here. And then you're going to go back down at the tip of the other one, but do not pull your thread all the way tight. You're going to leave kind of a little loop. Then at the base here, you're going to come up through the fabric and you're going to catch this loop. Like that. And then you'll go back down kind of over top of that loop to secure it. So the next stitch that I'm going to do is a satin stitch on all of these petals. So I will start towards the center of the flower on the petal, and I'm going to make vertical stitches. I'm going to start on one side and basically just make straight stitches side by side one another. This is a really good stitch to fill in like larger amounts of area. And you basically can just kind of pay attention to the edges of your design. Try to line up the stitches with the edges and kind of keep them even. It'll make your stitches look a lot neater. And now if you want to, you can go ahead and pause the video, and I'm just gonna fill in the rest of these petals, and so can you. All right, so I filled in the petals with the satin stitch, and the next stitch that I wanted to go over is a French knot. These can be a little bit more challenging for people. They're kind of, it takes a little bit more coordination to make sure that you get the knot nice and tight, and it can get kind of caught sometimes. So if you don't get this straight away, don't get frustrated. It just takes some practice. It took me a long time to feel comfortable doing them. So basically you're just gonna come up through the fabric and you're gonna pull your thread through. And underneath the fabric here, I don't like to knot my thread for the French knots because the knot kind of gets in the way of your stitch. So I keep the tail without a knot. That being said, you do want tension in the back. So I'm basically using my middle finger to hold on to the thread in the back. And then with my thumb and forefinger, I'm going to take the rest of the thread on the top and I'm going to twist it around. I'm at kind of a weird angle here. You can twist it as many times as you want. 2 to 3 makes a nice size knot. And while you're still holding tension, you're gonna go back down right next to or in the same hole that you came up through, like this. And you're gonna start pulling through, but don't lose the tension quite yet. Now you can let go and pull on both of the tails now in the back, and you should have a nice knot. So I'll do it a couple more times just to kind of show you. You don't need to really hold on to the back now that you already have a knot. So now it's a little bit easier to do. So twist 2 to 3 times, keep tension, and you're gonna go down through the fabric like that. The other thing is you don't want it to be super, super tight because like you can see right there, I struggled a little bit to get the eye of the needle and the tail of the thread through. So it's kind of like a happy medium when it comes to that. So if you want like a really small knot, you can wrap it around once, like this. If you want like a really large knot, you can wrap it around like 4, 5, 6 times. Really, it doesn't really matter. It's gonna be like kind of a tall, large knot. It's a little bit harder to pull through. But as you can see here, it kind of varies the size of your stitches. If you need more practice with this, if you filled this in and you still feel like you're not getting it completely, like I said, be patient with yourself. It takes time, but there's also a lot of negative space in this design, so you could easily like add some French knots in here with like different colors to kind of fill in the design more and make it look a little bit more interesting. So I kind of left a little bit of negative space in this design. That way, if you do want to practice something again after we've already done it once, then you can. This is just a little something extra, but if you want to kind of add a little bit more color to your flower, just for the fun of it, I like to make some straight stitches kind of towards the center of each petal. I'll make a couple, and it just looks kind of cute that way. If you're looking to like maybe keep this as, you know, a little project that you can frame. No pressure. Like we talked about in the beginning, this is just practice, but this is like a cute way to finish off flowers. So the next stitch I'm going to do is a fishbone stitch, and we'll be filling in the leaves of that flower with those. So basically I'm going to start from the tip of the leaf, and I'm just going to go down like about halfway down this leaf. It's pretty small, and make a stitch. And then I'm going to go down either side, it doesn't matter, left or right, of that initial stitch, kind of down the outline of that leaf. And I'm going to make a stitch. And I'm kind of going to make a slightly diagonal stitch towards the base of that first stitch you made. And then you're going to repeat that and do it on the other side. And you're just gonna work your way down the leaf like this, and it kind of makes like a subtle vein kind of in the middle of the leaf. And this is like one of my favorite stitches to do for leaves, just because of that, because it just naturally looks kind of like a leaf. Alright, so this next stitch for these little swirly guys, I wanted to use a stem stitch, and this stitch I always found to be a little bit challenging as well. I'm not entirely sure why, but we're gonna start on kind of the gentle curve here and then work our way to the tighter curve. I made it this way because I feel like stem stitches are kind of hard to work on curves without making them look really jagged and not very smooth. So I figured this would be good practice, but we'll start on the easiest part of this curve, because when you get to like tighter curves, I think it's a little bit harder. So you're gonna come up through the fabric, and you're basically going to keep your tail of your thread to one side to work this stitch, and you're gonna skip some space, a little bit more than like when you did the back stitch, and you're gonna put the tip of your needle down in the fabric. Then you're going to go up halfway through, and you're gonna pull through like that. And now I'm gonna keep this embroidery floss back to my left side still. You want to keep it in the same direction, and you're going to skip some space, and then you're going to go up you're going to come up where that last stitch ended. If it's too hard for you to do it this way where you're grabbing the fabric, you can also work it from the back, and I'll show you how you can also do that if that's too challenging. So you can actually go all the way down through the fabric if you're finding that to be a little bit weird, and just kind of keep a hold of this floss to the left side, and then come up with your needle through the fabric like that, and it makes like a decorative stitch. So this stitch can be a little bit hard if you're going off of the line, because then basically the stitches, you'll see like the underside of these stitches, as you can see. You want them to kind of lay where they like twist together. So when you go on curves, just like I don't think I mentioned this with the back stitch, but if you're working it on a curve, I find that smaller stitches make it look smoother. So you're gonna start to want to make your stitches a little bit smaller once you hit a tighter curve. And when you're working this, it doesn't matter, you don't have to keep the thread to the left side if you don't want to, but it just looks better if you keep it uniform and keep it to one side. So now that we're doing this curve here, now I'm going to start tightening up the stitch. And as you can see, I'm not like the very best at this stitch. I feel like some people do it and they make it look so smooth, but I also just don't really use this stitch that much. But I do teach it a lot to people as a basic stitch because it does serve itself well for like just decorative stitching, and a lot of patterns that you'll like download or buy use this stitch, so it's good to learn. The next stitch is called a blanket stitch. You can use this a lot to basically like finish the edging if you're hand stitching. That's a common way to do this, where this is stitched around the edge of a piece of fabric, but it's also kind of a decorative stitch you could use in projects. So I figured I would cover it. So first you're going to make a stitch on one of these little straight lines here at the very edge to start it out. Then you're going to come up through the fabric at the top of the next one, and then you're going to come down through to the bottom of the first stitch you made, but you're going to catch the loop that you've made here by going up through at the very base of that stitch, and it makes like a backwards L. So now you're just going to continue doing that. So you're going to basically stitch each tip of these little prongs here on the design. I'm so like full of great words today. And you're going to catch the stitch like that. And that's how you do a blanket stitch. The next stitch that I wanted to go over is a split stitch. This stitch I use a lot. I feel like not that many people use it that frequently. Maybe I'm wrong, but I love it. I like using it for like lettering and for basically anything that you want like a slightly thicker line than a back stitch. So you're gonna come up through the fabric and you're gonna make a stitch. And then you're gonna come up through the middle of that stitch, splitting it. And you're gonna make a stitch. And then you're going to split it again. And that's all you have to do. So these last two stitches are kind of in the same family. First, we're going to be doing a detached chain stitch, or it's also known as a lazy daisy stitch. And we're going to be doing that for these little petals on the stem. The next stitch we'll be doing is a regular chain stitch. The only difference is that they are literally what they say they are. It's detached, so it's a single stitch instead of chaining them together. So they have like very different uses. Chain stitch is normally more of an outline stitch, and then lazy daisy is more of a decorative stitch for things like leaves and flower petals. So you're going to come up at the base of that little petal, and you're basically going to go back down where you came up, but you're not going to pull through all the way. And then you're going to come up through the fabric at the top of that leaf shape, and you're going to catch that loop you just made. And then to secure it, you're just going to go back down over top of it. And that is how you do the detached chain stitch. So I'm just going to be working my way up this whole stem using those stitches. Alright, so the very last stitch will be the chain stitch, and I'm just going to start from the left and work my way to the right. So we're going to repeat that process that we did initially with the detached chain stitch, where you're going to come up and then back down through the same hole and catch the loop. And instead of going back down and securing that loop, you're just going to continue making these loops. So you're going to come back down through where you came up and catch the loop again. And this just creates a chaining effect, and you can continue to do this until the very end, and then you just secure that last loop like you do with a detached chain stitch. All right, everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed this embroidery tutorial and you learned something new. I tried to include a bunch of different stitches that I felt like are beginner friendly, and they're kind of basic fundamental stitches that you should learn. So once you get these down pat, I would definitely recommend looking into learning other ones, because they're really fun to learn and you can just branch out a lot with your skills that way. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and please let me know in the comments how you liked it. Thank you.